All right, excellent, excellent. Let me do the formal introductions here. So because what we're going to do is we're going to post this podcast to our website.
Yep.
It'll be available. It'll be available permanently for people to see it whenever they want to. So you can refer people to it.
Yep.
We'll also send you a copy of the podcast so that you can post it around on your own social media.
Lovely.
So, all right, we are speaking with Michael Chapman Pincher.
That's correct. In America, they call me Mickey Two Names.
Mickey. Yeah, I like that. Mickey Two.
In New York, I went in and I said Michael Chapman Pincher, and the guy looked at me and said, "Hey, Mickey Two Names, welcome."
Did you go to an Irish pub or something to get that?
Almost.
Okay, so we're talking to you from England, right? Where are you in England?
Yeah, I'm in a place called Worcestershire, which is sort of in the middle of England, and
Okay.
it's a beautiful county full of apples. They make lots of cider here, and it's as far away from the sea as you can get.
So it's not coastal, that's for sure.
No, not coastal.
Okay. Apple cider. This is the
Yeah,
apple season too, isn't it?
I think hard cider is what you Canadians call it.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Do you also no? You don't have maple trees there, so I don't imagine you make any maple syrup there.
No, but my grandson is half American, and when his American grandfather comes over, maple syrup arrives in the house.
Yeah, of course. All right. Well, great talking to you, Michael. So, we'll just formally introduce the podcast. This is what we call the Author Shout Out podcast. It's part of the International Writers Inspiring Change platform, which you're familiar with because we featured and reviewed your books.
Yep.
In fact, I read both of your books. Yep. I did reviews
Wonderful.
on them. Yeah, love the books. And so I'm really looking forward to this podcast.
Good.
I've been wanting to meet you for a while. So let's start off with a little background. Who is Michael Pincher? Tell us about yourself.
Well, I'll start off by saying I was the son of a very famous journalist, and I grew up, and he was called Harry Chapman Pincher, wrote under the name of Chapman Pincher, wrote for a big newspaper at the time, which had a massive circulation of about 8 or 9 million. So, that was big numbers in the 50s, 60s, 70s. And he was an investigative journalist. And he was a towering figure. And when I was young, I was terrified of him. And he'd had a very good war. He pulled himself up by his bootstraps and got through the war and became he was voted journalist of the decade because he was a real investigative reporter. And
you saying he was in the war or
yeah, he was in the war. He fought through the war, and he got a very interesting job, which was explaining military sort of boffins' crazy ideas to politicians, how they were going to blow the Germans out of their boots and stuff like that.
he was the
He had a very
interpreter
interesting war, came out of the war, made a name for himself, and I sort of grew up under his shadow a bit, and was a terrible disappointment to him, although he made it to 100 and we got along fine in the end. So
why were you terrible disappointment? Because you
because
grew up in the counterculture thing?
Well, he was ferociously smart, and he had learnt the hard way of how to get on. And my nickname when I was at school was Thick Mick, because I was pretty thick. I didn't really wake up till I got to about 19. I was just sort of dozing through life, and he couldn't understand why I couldn't grasp algebra and advanced calculus at the age of 8, which he'd been able to do. So I was a disappointment. So to come
He was kind of old school, I guess you would say, huh?
Yeah. So I flunked out of school, and then I started off working in the theatre, which is where the first book begins. And then from there, that was the time of the counterculture, and we got quite a lot of, I guess, hippie input over into the UK. and I went to the States very early on before many Brits had got over there, and I probably ruined it for everyone. So I was a bit of a novelty when I arrived. Went over there for love when I was about 19 and had a wonderful time in the late 60s, early 70s.
Where did you go in the States?
Well, I went down to Florida to start with, then I ended up in Georgia, then I ended up in New York, then I came back, then I went back to the States again, and I hitched all the way across it, north to south, east to west, and I had a whale of a time. Just worked my way around with my finger, with my thumb, as you could in those days.
And that was the way to that was when hitchhiking was considered totally popular in those days.
Well, it was popular. You didn't have to hang around for very long, and I got picked up by all sorts of crazies. And that was the time when hippies just looked you in the eye, and either you were in the gang or out. And if you were in the gang, hey, let's all go. Let's go crazy and have fun.
Exactly.
So, and then I came back and I started working in the theater again.
And what were you doing in the theater? Were you actually
I was a lighting
performing?
guy. I couldn't act. I can
Okay.
perform, but I can't act. And there's a great deal of difference. I can't inhabit the body of the great characters in all the theater shows. I can perform on stage, not bad, but I can't act.
So okay, so that's where the book Long Lost Log starts. Really, that's
That
in the theater.
starts because I was working in the theater and I walked out of a ridiculous situation, which I won't give a spoiler alert because that comes in the first chapter.
Right.
But then I got into a situation where I was sort of sofa surfing. I don't know if you had that expression over there. Yeah, I was sofa surfing, and I went to see a friend, and I said, I don't know what I'm doing. I want to go to sea. And he said, my father's sailing across the Atlantic, and he needs somebody to go with him. And I said, well, you better tell him I've never sailed before. And I don't think he believed that anyone could not have sailed before. But when I got down onto this boat, he eventually found out that I had never sailed before. So we,
But you when you joined up with him on the crew, he thought you had sailed.
no, I'd never sailed before. And he
Uh-huh.
said I was the only other person with him. He was running away with his mistress. He was an Anglo-Irish farmer setting off to sea, and he needed a crew. And so I had to learn pretty quick. And I would have made my father proud by the speed that I learnt to navigate with in the old-fashioned way, because this was all the old days of analog.
That's right. As I recall, too, you sailed down the west coast of
West coast of Spain, Portugal, and
uh,
France. Yeah, across the Bay of Biscay to France, then you touch a bit of Spain, then you would go all the way down to Portugal, and then across to the Canary Islands before setting on the last madcap trip across the Atlantic.
that must have been completely wild to do that trip across the Atlantic.
Well, one of those great things about when you're young and you're pretty stupid, you don't know what you're letting yourself in for, which
Right.
is why conscripts go to war because they have no idea what they're letting themselves in for.
Right.
It was a bit like that. It was one of those baptisms of fire where you get into a situation, and because you've nothing to compare it with, it's just all normal.
Yeah. And it's all just fun. It's just a new adventure.
Yeah, there are waves pouring over your head, and you're being buffeted by enormous winds and forces you had no idea how to reckon with. But hey, that's what it was, and you were there, and there was nothing you could do about it because there was no going back.
So you got your sea legs pretty quick then.
Got the sea legs pretty quick, and I turned out to be quite a good sailor, and it must have been something in the blood somewhere. The thing that let me down was my table manners, because he was a bit of a stickler. And there's an episode in the book which explains what happens if you have bad table manners at sea. Things can happen to you which you don't expect.
Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah. But what happened during the trip was because when we left, he said to me, look, anything could happen. So you're going to have to learn to sail and you're going to learn how to navigate because, anything could happen to me. And then you've just got to shadow me and get this stuff pretty quick. So I started keeping a log, a very accurate, detailed log of exactly where we were, what we were doing, the wind strengths, the weather, all the things that you need to observe. And the one great thing about sailing is when you're doing all that type of stuff is you start looking at the world with very open eyes. Where's that
Yes.
cloud coming from? Where's the wind coming from? And so it was the sort of last days before we all got buried our heads in phones that you actually had to take and pay attention to what was going on around you.
Uh, yeah, before there was ever GPS or anything.
We didn't have any of that. It was all done by dead reckoning and, side of land. And when you were out of side of land, it was done by sextants, by the sun and by the stars and various other things. So I had to keep this log. And we also stopped off at various places because he was in no rush. And we weren't in a race. So we were taking our time. So we had lots of lovely little stop-offs here and there. I didn't have any money with me, which was one of the major drawbacks, and he wasn't paying me. So I sort of had to bluff my way through various situations, which again is, a useful life skill. But also, while I was keeping this log, there were various discussions going on. And because I represented the youth of the day, and he represented those people that had come through the war and had won the war for us so we could have a better life. And here we were throwing two fingers up to everyone and saying, you can all go to hell because we want freedom, we want this, we want that. There were quite a lot of interesting exchanges. And the woman who he was running away with was pretty indomitable. She, and like he, everyone had interesting backstories. But, I was the young guy on board, and they were effectively sort of parents,
Right.
at the time to this um, bearded, hairy youth
So
who
total diametric cultures in,
absolutely, yeah.
enclosed in a small vessel going across the ocean.
Yeah, so it was, and then I started writing down our exchanges, the things that
Mm,
were said. So my log turned into not only a navigational tool, a geographic tool, but also an emotional one and a sort of social one.
mm,
And whenever we landed anywhere, I couldn't wait to get away from them quick enough. They couldn't wait to boot me off on shore. And so I had to go and, make my way. And the great thing about sailing people is there's always somebody around. There's lots of idiots on the water, and there are lots of very nice idiots. They're all sort of social and they'll invite you in on board, feed you, take pity on you. Um, and of course they're great drinkers. So there's good camaraderie. So I was never lonely,
no.
um, because you always had people to bump into.
No, I remember some of the escapades you got into. They were like pretty fascinating.
Well, some, you know, at the time you had no idea, I had no idea how dangerous they were. And although some were physical peril, I got into some moral peril as well. But, I was just a dumb hippie wandering around trying to become a decent sailor and make
Mm,
something of the navigation. So I also had no contact with home. And this was, of course, one of those days that you could send a telegram.
yeah,
Telephone calls were ferociously expensive.
right.
letters were sort of sent few and far between. I kept in touch with my sister, but otherwise nobody had any idea where I was, what I was doing. My mother didn't hear from me for well over a year and a half. But it was that sort of freedom which allowed you to be a bit crazy, but also, do that
Yeah,
growing
find
up.
your footing. Also
Yeah,
find your footing in life too.
find your
Yeah.
footing. Yeah,
I mean, I can relate to what you're saying because I mean, I grew up in the same time period as you during the
yeah, yeah,
counterculture, so
yeah,
totally identify with that. I also did a hitchhiking trip across Canada to Alaska and, freewheeled it for some months. And
yeah.
I know that sense of freedom. It's a complete detachment from everything. It's a wonderful feeling.
Yes,
So
glorious.
yeah, it is. I would
Well,
recommend it to anybody before they start off their life officially.
yeah, it takes some time. So the first book, what happened in the end was I got to the Caribbean, and I think we'd all had enough of one another. But I got dismissed off the boat pretty quickly. I mean, they had only wanted crew to help get them to the Caribbean, get them across the
Yeah,
Atlantic,
yeah.
and all the escapades are in the book. And once we were there, they said, "Well, thanks, goodbye." And I went, "Ah, but you're my new mummy and daddy." So they just they sailed away, leaving me sort of standing on the seashore of the Caribbean island, which,
Which island was that?
well, it was on Antigua.
Antigua, yeah.
Antigua, lovely place. Again, full of nice boats and fresh-faced young women and American jocks, big sturdy yachts, and all sorts of types of things. Money was around, there was work, you could do work, and I've always been practical and handy. So I could pick up work and get by. And then I moved around some of the islands and ended up in San Juan, Puerto
Hmm.
Rico, which was lovely. Picked up some rather good Spanish there, and all that sort of thing. Had a love affair, and then found another boat and jumped on the other boat, which is the second book. Now, how these all
Did
came,
you intend, just to the point here, Long Lost Log is the first book,
yeah.
but Long Lost Love, the second one, did you actually intend for there to be a second book? Was that sort of a natural thing, or did
Well, the trip was divided into two bits.
uh
There was the first bit, and what had happened was that when I left the Caribbean to go through the Panama Canal up to Canada on this other boat, I somehow lost my previous logbook. And it had just, it had got lost somewhere along the line. And it was only during COVID, uh, when we were in lockdown, that a Facebook ping on a message went and said, "Are you the Michael who was in the Caribbean and so and so?" And then I immediately knew who it was. And she had kept my log in a memory box of hers, because we had had a lovely holiday romance. I was 21, she was 20. Her parents would never have approved. We had a
is this the same girl that you had the relationship with in Puerto
in
Rico?
the yes, yeah, that's the one.
This should be like 50 years later. This pops
50
up.
years later, she found me.
Amazing.
I mean, that's social media for you. People find their old friends,
That's
and
amazing. Yeah.
yeah. So she sent me back the logbook. I got a couple of pages, and then I got the whole thing back. And a friend of mine said, "Well, it's come back, so you have to write it." So I started off writing it, and he looked at the first draft and tore it up and said, "That's rubbish." So I started again and I showed it to him again. And this was somebody who has proper literary credentials. And he tore it up again. He said, "Go back and start again." And he said, "What you have to do is you have to write this as though you have no idea what's going to happen tomorrow. You have to be in
Mm,
the present, and you can't put in anything that you've learnt since. You can't suddenly have an aside saying, oh, now I'm much older, I knew about this. And it's just got to be immediate. I thought this is impossible, but it's possible. And
they
with
wanted you to write it in the moment, like you were
I had
there.
to write it in the moment. I had to turn the page of the logbook day by
Uh-huh.
day and
Interesting.
not refer to anything in the future as the book went on. And the great thing about having the internet around is there are awful lot of photographs of what places used to look like then. So if you type in, I mean, Lanzarote, for instance, where we stayed for some time, there are harbors which are now big, swanky marinas. But back in the day, they were just, one horse hick towns with just some fishermen.
Right.
And in order to be able to catch that atmosphere, I managed to find all those old photographs because there's so many people who put up their pictures and all this type of stuff. And in one, I found our boat. I said, "Well, that's out there. Woo!" So one was able to get visual clues as well as what I had written down. So it was quite easy to get back in the moment. The thing I had to do was I had to hang a towel over the bathroom mirror because while I was writing, I fell back into being that idiot. And if I ever walked into the bathroom and saw myself as I was now, that would have ruined the image, broken the spell.
See, you really just sort of regressed 50 years to
I,
write the book.
well, the funny thing is that you fishermen and golfers and sailors are notorious tellers of tales. Um, but I had sort of made a pact with myself that I wasn't going to tell anyone all this stuff. And certainly, there are things in it that my children wouldn't necessarily want to hear. So I hadn't told anybody. One or two incidents had come out when I was sailing with other people, but by and large, I'd never told the story before. So it was that ability to be able to tell it for the first time,
Hmm.
which is hopefully what makes it immediate and you feel as though you're there. And that's what people have told me. They said, yeah, God, I was there with you. Woo! So,
Well, I mean, I had the same reaction when I read the books because it felt like I could identify with what was happening in the moment and didn't feel like you were talking about something in retrospect.
well, I'm glad that came across. I mean, that
Yeah.
is down to this friend who's sadly no longer with us, who was ruthless in getting me to do that, to driving me to that literary storytelling idea of being there absolutely in the moment. And
Hmm.
a lot of writers say it that once your characters start, manifesting themselves to you, and these were people that I had known, the skipper and his partner, who was ferocious. She was always telling me off for something or other. Um, their voices came back from the grave, as it were, and I could hear them saying it because I had written some words down. And once you just got those clues and the cues, then it all just
Just,
comes back,
yeah, it just triggers the memories.
just triggers the memory. And because I'd never dug into those memories before, memories are notoriously dodgy things to deal with. But because I had some grounding in front of me, the logbook and the weather and the conditions and all that type of stuff, and calculations, which I look at now and I can't even, believe that I was doing them. But when we arrived in Antigua, we were a mile off course. So we'd set out from England. mind you, you have steps along the way so you know where you are. But when we
Right.
arrived in Antigua, we were 1 nautical mile wrong.
Not bad.
No, I mean astonishing. As in the book, we met people who were on completely the wrong islands in the Canaries.
Yeah.
Thought they were somewhere else.
I have a question. Do you think that you would have ever written the book if this friend of yours or this associate hadn't prompted you to, after the diary showed up?
Well, I was sort of toying with the idea, but it was pretty turgid, my first couple of drafts. And it was as though, I was going, all the things I've learned since then. And I was trying to inject some things, back in the day, you should have seen us when we were, before the mast and all this type of stuff. And he just threw it out and threw it out. And eventually, the publisher saw it and clocked the immediacy of it and got it. And that was, a great help. Otherwise, it would have probably never seen the light of day.
And I think that was great advice because otherwise it would be told like more like a documentary as opposed to, or, like in
Yeah,
the now type of real life narrative because you can identify. I associated with the book, obviously for other
yeah,
reasons, because,
yeah.
we come from a similar baby boomer time period, but nonetheless, it was just, yeah, I think that made all the difference in making it a great read.
Well, thank you for that. I think also one of the things about that time, it was all very immediate.
Mm,
We had come out of, war years, austerity over here. Things had been grey and dull, and gradually the colour was coming back into things. So
yeah,
it was there were new sensations all over the place.
yeah,
Music was raw, music was new, it was exciting. You couldn't wait to hear what was coming out. So there was an
yeah,
immediacy
definitely.
in the
I mean,
time.
the beauty of the music at that time is on the subject I want to take up now is the whole counterculture movement.
Yeah,
Because I think the music of the 70s was very much the voice of the counterculture movement, as I
yeah,
recall.
yeah, yeah.
Um, um, let's talk about that a little bit. How did you see the counterculture movement at that time? What did counterculture mean to you in the 70s?
Well, I genuinely believed at that time that we were going to bring the society down, that
Hmm.
there was going to be fundamental change, that
The
the armed
anti-establishment
protests, the
perspective. Yeah,
establishment was going to crumble.
right.
And so having an alternative life was, the obvious thing to do because, hey, who needs a pension? Who needs qualifications? Who needs a job? All those sort of things which later come back to haunt you in one way or another. Um, one felt they were, this is the dawning of the age of Aquarius. It was bingo. All the
That was
all
the
the
byword.
yeah, all the signs pointed to hope.
Yeah,
And then, of course, things happened, and the whole counterculture, in many ways, got subsumed by Madison Avenue as much as anything else. And then, some bad vibes went down, man. Know what I mean?
yeah,
And the dream sort of began to turn into a slight nightmare. And then it's sort of fractured. But I remember, you walk down a street, you could look somebody in the eye, and you knew if they were in or out. And then you could
yeah.
just go off together. It was a fantastic moment. I've just been wandering around the streets of London, trying to engage people in eye contact, and it's very difficult now.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know, people
It's a
won't.
totally different culture today. I agree
Yeah,
with you completely because
yeah,
back then you could just perceive, you could feel it, who was in the club and who was with the mediocrity, and
yeah,
then
yeah.
It was very easy. How do you see that? Okay, well, actually, you kind of tripped on the next point. How do you how does the current society now, as we live in, how does it compare to the counterculture one that we knew back in the 70s?
Well, uh, the sort of slightly younger generation sneer at us for our naivety, for not realizing that the force of reaction is so strong. They also go, hey, boomer, out of the way, boomer, move out of the way, you're blocking our path. Because in many ways, we've sucked up a lot of resources, houses, assets, money, which they said, hey, get out of the way. It's our time now. I'm not sure there's the same sort of, not going to say intellectual, but there was a lot of interesting thinking going on. And I'm not sure that thinking happens now. There's a lot more action in terms of sort of, there's a lot more fantasy, which is, Rich seemed to sing. There's a lot more engagement in shoot 'em up games and all that sort of type of stuff. But there doesn't seem to be the same social interaction as was happening
Right.
then. And I
I
think,
totally agree with you.
yeah, I
I
think
totally agree
there's,
with you.
I think they're resentful of us. When I say they, this is my children.
Oh, I understand. I understand.
Yeah,
We're
yeah,
talking, we're talking millennials on up to
yeah,
the
yeah,
newest generation. And yeah, I think I agree with you. But this brings us to a point which I always touch on with authors like yourself on this podcast, is the fact that not to diss the new generation, because of course they have their own talents and they have certain
yeah, yeah,
abilities that we never had back then
yeah, yeah,
due to technology and stuff. But at the same time, one of our main concerns at International Writers Inspiring Change, if you look at our platform, our mission
yeah,
statement, is to restore or increase reading and literacy, because it becomes a concern when reading. I mean, back in the day, we would sit on the subway or the metro and read a book. Today,
yeah,
they don't even own a book.
yeah,
They just get the dopamine kick out of watching YouTube or something like that. But we're losing a certain literacy level in the culture, and that, that's why I think it's so important that we have authors like yourself who just say, hey,
well, one hopes, yeah. I
yeah,
mean, it's interesting, that dopamine hit. I've been researching that today. So, it's important because I was sitting on a bus and everyone was looking at their phone, just getting that hit in order to avoid having to confront the reality of what's going on around you, being bored by, life, which most of the time is pretty dull. So, they're now, fortunately, I don't too much, but getting that little hit, the restless, constantly going on without actually just stopping and allowing the mind the manure of boredom. Because that's, I mean, the one thing about sailing is a lot of it is so boring. I mean, it is dull. There's either not enough wind or the wind's in the wrong direction and it's taking you forever to get somewhere. You can see it's over there, but you can't get there. It's going to take you hours. And that ability to just be bored. And then, you start noticing the really small things.
yeah.
And it's noticing the small things, which makes things quite interesting.
I think it's a really good point that you brought up there, though, that with the fixation on the phones and the digital world, they don't have to look at the world around them. And I noticed this too. The same thing, obviously. We're headquartered here in Sweden,
Yeah.
uh, but still, you walk down the street and people are just looking at their phones, but they're not making eye contact. They're not talking to one another. They're talking to somebody on the phone, or they're not. But it's really become an alternative reality. It's not looking at the real world.
I know it's very strange to observe it.
Almost dystopian. I feel almost
Yeah.
Orwellian to that I'm living in a sort of a developing Orwellian dystopia.
Well, the worst bit is I went to Romania on a holiday, and there are people who grew up during the communist period and
Mm,
they knew what it was like. Then
mm,
there are people who revolted and brought the communist thing down. So then they lived in freedom, which they created. And then there's young people who have no idea what the communist regime was at all, no point of reference to it. So one feels like that sometimes, that there are fractures in the society of where people who have no idea of what an analog world was like. And it's not their fault because, that's the way it is. It's,
yeah,
I don't remember riding around on horses too much, but my father did. Um,
right.
as a boy, he remembers horses all over the place. So we take things for granted and then they just catch up. But that whole dystopian idea is very worrying.
Oh, yeah,
I mean, I'm an AI guy now. I'm very involved with it, but it's the worst of all. If
yeah.
if I could have had it, I'd have shot it at birth. But
Understand. All right, so great. Well, we talked about the today's culture. Um, are you still doing any adventuring, or are you?
I'm going to. I went to India last year. When I was a
Okay,
hippie, I went to America, and I went to India for the first time, and I'm going back there at this Christmas, and I'm going back to be Father Christmas in an Indian village, in a
really?
Hindu Indian village. There's a reason why that's happening, but um, so I love that because they have, well, India is a real up and coming country. It's
Yeah.
got young people and they are excited. You can see they're excited by the opportunities available to them. And so it's quite exciting being around that because England is very flat. There's
Yeah.
no growth. There's a lot of division. It's like wine that's lost all its fizz, or beer that's gone flat, probably is a better description of England.
Mm.
Whereas India is very much
Very vibrant. It's
boom.
it's
Yeah,
growing so fast. I mean,
yeah,
they've come along in the last 20 years. They have just
yeah.
changed so dramatically.
And the colours and the whole excitement of the place, and walking across a road, which you could never imagine that chaos. It's got the chaos of the anthill. And I started off saying, how do I do this? And somebody was with me saying, you just walk out. You just walk across the road and everyone will miss you. And they do. And you're higgledy-piggledy amongst them all, and it's amazing.
It's a different concept of quantity in India. It's like a city block might have 1 million people, whereas in
Yeah.
here in Sweden, you walk down, there might be 10 people on that street, and that's it.
Well, yeah, it's different scales. I'm not sure I'd sail again. I mean,
Uh,
I do bits of sailing, but I haven't done any for a year or so, and that's not because of age. I think it's a different. It's also quite dangerous now. I mean, it was relatively dangerous, but it wasn't as you weren't taking so many risks with ruthless people, which I think are now around and about.
mm,
There
yeah,
were there's bad people around, but I think there's now a lot of very ruthless people around. And certainly people I know who are sailing, they've curtailed where they go and what they do.
yeah, I understand. Well, your adventures in later life now, are we going to see a third book or something sort of
Well, somebody says, I mean, I wrote the second book, and that's, it took me up to Canada. And then after that, I'm still in touch with the people I sailed with, although the skipper is dead and the mother is dead, but all the three daughters are still alive. And although I fictionalized them in the book, one of the reasons being that certain activities which went on, you wouldn't want to say with the truth when you come to applying for a visa to
I
get into
understand.
America. So I sort of fictionalized it. No, I just made that up. Um, but
That's defensible.
yeah, they're still alive and I'm still in touch with them. So that's been quite interesting. But I had kept that logbook. That was the one that I had kept, and because I carried on doing what I'd done before. So there's the second book where I was able to relive that on the back of having finished the first, and on having finished the first, I then had the chops to be able to just carry on in that vein.
Yeah,
And it's a vein I like writing in. I find it very refreshing.
yeah. Also very cathartic to just sort of like go back and open
Yeah,
doors. And
yeah. There's some more things, but you know how hard it is, to make a living out of writing. It's an enormous amount of effort. You get the reward. In my town, people come up to me and said, "I've read your book. I love it. It's fantastic." And I said, "Well, thanks for buying it." They said, "Oh, no, no, this is the one copy that's going round." And you went, "What?" "Oh, yeah, there's one copy. Everyone's reading it." And you go, "Well, thanks a lot. You could have gone out and bought your own." And I know, 30 people have read one copy of the book. They've all gone, "You
yeah,
must read this," and hand it on.
it's unfortunate, this,
Trying to get a crust here.
yeah. Trying to make it into a profitable activity.
Yeah.
Well, you have to write with passion and live on that passion because it isn't going to be the money all the time. That's for sure.
No, it's very difficult. My father, who wrote millions of words, um, he never had a bestseller. He sold quite well, and he wrote about spies because spying was his big thing. But he had a pal who lived in the village, who's a massively successful author. I don't think he writes very well, but he's just caught the wind. And, he's a multi-millionaire just off his books and films. And as my father said, I can write 100 words, he writes 10, and, he'll make more money out of those 10 than I will out of my million.
Yeah.
So when I published, it's quite interesting that the publishing world is very much a closed shop. I managed to get onto the BBC I got onto one of those book programs, and I got on through a sort of guerrilla marketing campaign. And at the end of it, somebody said, "How did you get on here? Who's your agent?" And I said, "I don't have one." They said, "Well, what were you doing here?" And I said, "Well, I got on. Plugged my book." And they said, "Yeah, but that's not the way it's supposed to work." And you go, "Oh, yeah, so I'm supposed to know someone who knows someone who knows someone who knows someone."
Yeah, it's unfortunate because that quote unquote protocol, you have to find an agent, but that's a very narrow bottle. Uh,
Yeah, it's very, very tough. It's
Very
hard.
tough to get that in for with so many authors and good authors hitting the airwaves these days, but it's a it's an ocean now compared to the tiny sea that it was at one time.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, and I had a very interesting niche publisher for Long Lost Log, which is and that got a lot of credibility. But the trouble with publishers is they're pretty lazy. Unless they think that something's going to be a real winner, they're not prepared to put much effort into it. So you have to go out and do it all yourself.
That's
And
right.
I learned this from my dad, so it's not just me going on about it. And he was a household name. So it's always has been in the UK a bit of old boys club. Although there's a massive amount of women in it now, it's always been a relatively closed shop.
Yeah, yeah, I would agree with you. Well, going to be wrapping up here.
Lovely. Well, it's been a great pleasure talking with a
Well,
fella.
no, honestly, I just love the conversation. I could probably go on for a couple hours because we can
Well, I
compare
want to get you
notes.
talking about your stuff.
Yeah, we can compare notes and adventures. But let me ask you one last question before we end off here. If you were going to give a novice author coming into the fray here, advice, what would be the one thing you would tell them? What would be that one piece of the one tip?
Well, apart from don't start, go and do something else. So if you're committed to that, and that's the path you're going to go down because you want to write, then I think it all seems to come down to authenticity. You've just got to find your authentic self to talk. And as a number of people have said, and I found it to be true, if all you've got to do is turn up, and if you turn up, even if you sit down at your desk and sharpen your pencils or whatever tool you use, and I write a lot in my handwriting, as well as I do on screen. You just got to turn up and be prepared to wait, because if there's something there, the muse comes, and these characters who appear, they get a life of their own and they don't let you alone. And then you wake up in the middle of the night and one of them saying something, why don't I just do this instead of that? Why did I say that? I should have said this. So you can go back and go, well, if you said that, that would happen. So it's the turning up. And it's a long, lonely road being an author. You have to spend a lot of time. But it comes back to what we were talking about now, is that, don't search for the dopamine of an immediate hit. Be prepared to let the compost of stillness come in and just bide your time, wait, but turn up. And you find, oh God, I've got to sit down. I'm only going to sit down for 20 minutes. No, I'll do an hour. And then 5 hours later, you find that the evening's coming in and you forgot to do all the chores that you were supposed to do, but your characters have come in and run away with you. And that's what I find terrific, is that
Yeah, that's fun.
the
That's the fun part.
enjoyment of writing should be the pleasure in itself.
Yeah.
And it's that bit that you should take some satisfaction from, even though you're going to end up in in this vast ocean of books and you may never be heard of again. But because there is a great pleasure in the craft.
Yeah. That's beautifully put. Very beautifully put.
Thank you. Well, this
I
has
would
been a
agree
great
with you.
pleasure.
Yeah, I would agree with you 100% on that. Well, Michael, it's really been, well, it's inspiring actually just talk to you because you have such a great,
Well, thank
you have a
you.
great, you have a great life. You told some great stories. Wonderful.
Thank you. Well, it's been a pleasure sitting down and talking with you. And let's
Yeah,
hope we can work together, because I've I've got some time and it'd be nice to do some things together.
I agree. I totally agree.
Yeah, I don't know how I can help, but if I can, I'm willing to.
All right, well, we'll stay in touch on that. What we'll do
Lovely.
now is the iWick people will go ahead and take the podcast and they'll send you a copy of it. So you'll get an
Yeah.
email in a couple of days with a copy of the podcast. We'll post it up on the page. And then, of course, refer your readers to all 30 of the ones who passed that one book and the others. Tell them to go to the website and they can check out the podcast.
Yeah. I know. I did an audio book of that one as well, and I've half got through the audio of the second one, but I keep on getting royalty statements for the audio book of the first.
That's
And
good.
I mean, it took a massive amount of effort to do it. And then you get the royalty statement comes in, it pings into your inbox, and you open it, and it's $10. And you go, yeah.
It's just not commensurate with the effort. It is like you said, though, you just simply have to love the writing, and
Yeah, I
that's
love the writing and love all that type of stuff. And then I got through the most of the audiobook of the second book, and then decided to change something. And I've, hey ho. So it's been a great joy. Rael, thank you very much.
Thank you for joining the podcast, Michael. We'll definitely be in touch. Have a great week.
Thank you. Take
All
care
right.
now. Bye now.
Yeah. Bye now.